I never expected that a massive, ancient oak tree crashing through my neighbor's roof would change my life. But that's exactly what happened. It's funny, isn't it? How we build these quiet, predictable lives, brick by brick, routine by routine, only for nature or fate, or whatever you want to call it, to come along with a wrecking ball and show you what you were really missing. For me, that wrecking ball was named Julian. Let me take you back. My life, before the storm, was a library. I don't just mean that I was a librarian, which I was. I mean my entire existence was cataloged, ordered, and hushed. I lived in a small duplex, the left side of a charming but slightly weathered old house. My days were measured in the rustle of turning pages and the soft beep of the checkout scanner. My evenings were about the quiet hum of the refrigerator, a book in my lap, and a cup of herbal tea steaming on the coaster beside me. I wasn't unhappy, but I see now that my contentment was a carefully constructed fortress designed to keep out the unpredictable, the messy, the loud. And then Julian moved into the right side of the duplex. He was the antithesis of everything my life had become. His arrival was announced not by a polite knock, but by the roar of a pickup truck and the thumping bass of a rock station I couldn't identify. He was a landscape architect, a man who wrestled the earth into beautiful, tamed shapes for a living, and his presence felt just as elemental. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his worn t-shirts, and his arms were a testament to his work, tanned and corded with muscle, often smudged with dirt even after he'd showered. I would see him in the shared backyard, sketching in a notepad with a concentration that seemed at odds with his boisterous energy. I'd watch from my kitchen window as he hauled bags of soil and unearthed stubborn roots, his movements economical and powerful. He had a laugh that carried through the walls, a deep, uninhibited sound that would startle me out of my reading. He was, in a word, overwhelming. And to my quiet, lonely heart, he was impossibly beautiful. Of course, I filed him away under unattainable. He was confident, extroverted, and radiated a kind of easy, traditional masculinity that felt a million miles away from my own quiet nature. I assumed he was straight, that his life was full of pretty girlfriends who were just as sunny and outgoing as he was. So, I kept my distance. I'd offer a polite, slightly flustered wave when we passed each other on the walkway, my heart doing a little stutter step in my chest. He would always grin back, a flash of white teeth in a sun-browned face. "Hey, Miles," he'd call out, and the simple act of him knowing my name felt like a minor miracle. For months, that was the extent of our relationship, a series of polite greetings across the lawn, the sound of his life bleeding through the walls into mine, and my own silent, hopeless admiration. I was an observer, safely tucked away in my fortress, watching a life I could never be a part of. The predictability I craved was also my cage, and I didn't even realize it until the wind started to pick up. The forecast had been talking about it for days. A once-in-a-generation storm was barreling toward our town, bringing with it torrential rain and destructive winds. Most people were boarding up windows and stocking up on batteries. I, of course, was mostly concerned about potential water damage to my collection of first editions. It shows you where my priorities were. The day before the storm was supposed to make landfall, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't the soft, hesitant tap I was used to. It was a solid, firm rapping of knuckles. I opened it to find Julian standing on my welcome mat, looking more serious than I had ever seen him. The usual easy grin was gone, replaced by a line of concern on his brow. "Hey, Miles. Sorry to bother you," he started, his voice a little lower than usual. He gestured over his shoulder toward the massive old oak tree that stood in the center of our shared backyard. It was a majestic thing, a landmark for the neighborhood, but it was also ancient. "I've been looking at that big branch overhanging my roof. And yours, too, with the winds they're predicting. I'm worried." I followed his gaze. He was right. A limb as thick as my body stretched out over the back half of the duplex, a silent, woody threat. He wasn't just being a concerned neighbor. He was being a professional. He knew the physics of stress and leverage, the breaking point of wood. "I've already called the city," he continued, "but they're swamped. There's no way they'll get to it in time." He shoved his hands into the pockets of his jeans, a gesture that I was beginning to recognize as his version of nervous energy. "I just wanted to give you a heads up. Maybe move anything valuable away from the back rooms. Just in case." I was struck by his thoughtfulness. He hadn't just worried about his own home. He had come to warn me. Oh, right. Thank you, Julian. That's really considerate of you. I felt a familiar heat rise in my cheeks. He gave me a small, tired smile, just looking out for my neighbor. And with that, he went back to his side of the house, leaving me with a new, much more tangible anxiety than the potential for a damp book. The storm hit that night, and it was worse than anyone had predicted. The wind screamed like a wounded animal, and the rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. I sat in my living room, listening to the house groan and shudder around me. Around 2 in the morning, there was a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't just a crack of thunder. It was a deeper, splintering, wrenching roar, followed by a ground-shaking impact that felt like the entire world had just collapsed. My lights flickered and died. The house fell into a terrifying silence, broken only by the howling wind. I sat frozen in the dark for a long moment before my phone, thankfully charged, lit up with a text message. It was from Julian. "You okay?" I typed back with trembling fingers. "Yes. You? That was the tree, wasn't it?" His reply came a minute later. "Yeah, it came through my roof. My whole bedroom is gone. Apartment's not livable. Flooding everywhere." My heart sank. His home was destroyed. My side seemed to have been spared the worst of it, aside from a shattered kitchen window and some rattling, but he was in real trouble. Without even thinking, I found myself typing a response that would irrevocably alter the course of my quiet, ordered life. "My place is fine. The guest room is small, but it's dry. You should come over." A long pause followed. I watched the 3 little dots appear and disappear, my breath held tight in my chest. What was I doing? Bringing this loud, overwhelming, beautiful man into my quiet sanctuary? Finally, his message appeared. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "Don't be ridiculous," I typed back, a strange boldness taking hold of me. "Get over here before you drown." A few minutes later, I opened my front door to find him soaked to the bone, shivering, with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a look of dazed gratitude on his face. As he stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto my immaculate hardwood floors, he brought the chaos of the storm in with him. And as I closed the door behind him, I felt the distinct, terrifying, and exhilarating sensation of the lock on my fortress clicking open. My carefully ordered world was about to be turned upside down. Having Julian in my space was like inviting a friendly, well-meaning hurricane to stay for the weekend. The first morning after the storm, I woke to the smell of coffee. Not the delicate, single-origin pour-over I usually made for myself, but a rich, dark, robust aroma that filled the entire apartment. I padded out of my bedroom to find him in my kitchen, already dressed in a fresh t-shirt and jeans, a towel slung around his neck. He was navigating the cramped space with an ease that baffled me, a mug already waiting on the counter. "Morning," he said, offering a small, sheepish smile. "Hope you don't mind. I figured we could both use it." He looked tired, the stress of the previous night etched in the faint lines around his eyes, but he was still vibrant. He was a splash of vivid color in my beige world. "Thank you," I managed, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. This is good." It felt strange to share my morning routine, this sacred, solitary time. But it wasn't unpleasant. It was just different. Over the next few days, our lives began to merge in unexpected ways. His insurance adjusters and contractors came and went, their serious faces and clipboards a constant reminder of the disaster next door. In the evenings, with nowhere else to go, we would end up in my living room. At first, it was awkward. We'd sit on opposite ends of the sofa, a respectable distance between us, making small talk about the weather and the slow progress of the repairs. I learned that his parents lived a few states away, and that he had a sister who was a nurse. He learned that I had moved here for the university library job right after getting my master's degree and had never left. It was during one of those quiet evenings that I started to see past the confident, easygoing exterior I had built up in my mind. He was looking at the water stain that had blossomed on my ceiling near the damaged kitchen window, a frown on his face. "This is my fault," he said, his voice low. "I knew that tree was a risk. I should have pushed the city harder, or just hired someone myself to take it down." "Julian, that's absurd," I said, surprised by his guilt. "You can't blame yourself for a storm. You warned me. You probably saved me from much worse damage." He shook his head, not looking at me. I'm supposed to be the guy who understands this stuff. How trees fall, how structures hold up. It feels like I failed, you know? It was the first time I had ever heard a note of insecurity in his voice. This man who seemed so capable, who wrestled the very land into submission, felt like he had failed. It was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the vulnerable person underneath. And it made my heart ache in a way that was entirely new. The real revelation came a day later. I came home from work to find him not in the living room, but hunched over my kitchen table. The books from the shelf nearest the shattered window had gotten soaked, and I'd laid them out to dry, resigned to their warped pages and faded ink. One of them was a particularly beloved collection of poetry, a rare find from a secondhand shop years ago. Julian was there, with a stack of paper towels and a small, delicate touch I would never have associated with him, carefully separating the damp, clinging pages. He was working with an intense, gentle focus, treating the ruined book with a reverence I found deeply moving. I must have made a sound, because he looked up, startled. "Oh, hey, I hope you don't mind." I saw these were still wet, and, well, if you separate the pages with absorbent paper while they dry, it can help prevent some of the warping. He looked down at the book in his hands, almost embarrassed. "It's just something I know. Old paper, new paper, it's all just fiber, right?" I stood there, speechless for a moment. This was the man I had stereotyped as just a loud, sporty guy. And here he was, patiently trying to save my waterlogged poetry. It was a gesture so small and so profoundly thoughtful that it knocked the air out of my lungs. "Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." He just shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "No problem." In that moment, something shifted. The image I had of him, the loud neighbor, the unattainable crush, crumbled away, replaced by something far more complex and compelling. He was a man who felt guilt for things beyond his control, a man who treated a stranger's water-damaged book with the care of a surgeon. The hope that I had so carefully suppressed began to rise, a tentative, fragile thing. I was starting to see the real Julian, and the more I saw, the more I feared my own heart wouldn't be able to handle it. The fortress was well and truly breached now. The second storm wasn't in the forecast. It rolled in late one evening, swift and violent, a furious encore to the main event. 1 minute, we were cleaning up after dinner in a comfortable, practiced silence, and the next, the sky opened up. The lights flickered ominously, and a sudden, concussive clap of thunder shook the house so hard that a book fell off my shelf. I jumped, startled by the noise, but when I looked at Julian, I saw something more than surprise. His face had gone pale. He was standing perfectly still by the sink, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the counter. The easy confidence he normally wore had vanished, replaced by a stark, primal fear. "Julian, are you okay?" I asked, taking a hesitant step toward him. He swallowed hard, his eyes wide and fixed on the window as lightning bleached the world white for a second. "Yeah," he breathed, but it was unconvincing. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just not a fan of thunder." Not a fan was a massive understatement. As the storm intensified, so did his anxiety. He started pacing the living room, a caged, restless energy radiating from him. The wind howled, rattling the new pane of glass in the kitchen window, and with every boom of thunder, he would flinch as if struck. This was the man who had faced the destruction of his home with stoic practicality, now undone by sound and light. It was another layer of him revealed, another piece of the puzzle that was Julian. Then, with a final, sputtering hum, the power died. We were plunged into an absolute, disorienting blackness. The only light was the intermittent, terrifying strobe of the lightning outside, and the only sound was the roar of the storm and our own breathing. "Okay," Julian's voice came out of the dark, tight and strained. "Okay." I could hear the tremor in it. He was genuinely terrified. "It's all right," I said, my own fear secondary to his. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The small beam cut through the darkness, landing on his face. He looked haunted. "When I was a kid," he said, his voice quiet and shaky, "a tornado hit our town. Our house was okay, but we hid in the cellar for hours. All I remember is the sound. That roaring, like a train that never passes." He shook his head, as if to clear it. "Stupid, I know. I build things for a living. I know how houses are put together. But that sound, My heart went out to him. "It's not stupid at all," I said softly. I moved closer, the beam of my phone wobbling slightly. Is there anything I can do?" He looked around the room wildly, his gaze landing on the small door under the staircase. The pantry. It was the most central part of the house, small, windowless, and solid. "In here," he said, his voice decisive. "It's the safest place." I didn't question it. I followed him as he pulled open the door. The space was tiny, barely big enough for one person, let alone two. It smelled faintly of old wood, spices, and dust. He squeezed in first, and I followed, pulling the door shut behind us. We were enveloped in a profound, muffling darkness. The roar of the storm instantly diminished to a distant rumble. We stood pressed together in the cramped space, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the frantic thumping of his heart against my arm. My own heart was hammering in my chest for an entirely different reason. The air was thick with his fear and my everything. My hope, my anxiety, my longing. He reached out in the pitch black, his hand finding the wall, and slid the old iron bolt across. The metallic scrape was deafeningly loud in the silence. It felt so final, as if we were locking ourselves away from the entire world. And in a way, we were. It was just us. Just this. Time seemed to stretch and warp. I have no idea how long we stood there. It could have been minutes or an hour. I was hyper-aware of everything. The subtle shift of his weight, the texture of his t-shirt against my skin, the sound of his breathing, which was slowly, gradually, beginning to even out. The storm outside raged on, but in our little wooden box, a strange sense of peace began to settle. My own anxiety from the storm had my skin feeling clammy. A bead of sweat, or perhaps a single, errant tear of empathetic fear, trickled down from my temple. I didn't even notice it until I felt a sudden, gentle touch. It was Julian's thumb, brushing against my skin, warm and calloused and impossibly soft all at once. He was just wiping away the moisture, a simple, caring gesture. But then he didn't pull his hand away. His thumb rested on my cheekbone for a long, charged moment. I held my breath. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. In the absolute darkness, every other sense was magnified. I could feel the infinitesimal tremor in his hand. I could hear the soft hitch in his breath. And then, he did something that shattered my universe. He slowly drew his hand back. I thought the moment was over, a fleeting, ambiguous connection in the dark. But then I felt the faintest shift in the air near my face. He had lifted his thumb to his lips. I didn't see it. I couldn't. But I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. I heard the tiny, wet sound, a barely perceptible intake of breath. He had tasted the salt on my skin. My entire body went rigid. A jolt, more powerful than any lightning strike, shot through me. What was that? What did it mean? It was the most intimate gesture I had ever experienced, and it happened in complete darkness, born of fear and proximity. It was deliberate. It was questioning. It was everything. The storm outside had become irrelevant. The real tempest was right here, in this tiny pantry, raging between the two of us. When the storm finally passed, it left a silence that was heavier and more charged than the noise had been. The distant rumble of thunder faded, replaced by the soft, steady drip of water from the eaves. We stood in the pantry for what felt like an eternity after the last thunderclap, neither of us speaking, neither of us moving. The air was thick with the unspoken. The memory of his touch, of that impossibly intimate gesture, hung between us in the darkness, a tangible thing. Eventually, the low hum of electricity returned, and a sliver of light appeared under the pantry door. The power was back on. It felt like a curtain rising on a play we were not prepared to perform. Slowly, as if waking from a dream, Julian reached out and slid the bolt back. The sound was just as loud as before, but this time it signaled an end, not a beginning. He pushed the door open, and the sudden light of the hallway was blinding. We both flinched, stepping out of our dark, secret world and back into reality. And reality was excruciatingly awkward. We couldn't look at each other. He immediately busied himself with checking the circuit breakers, and I went to the window, pretending to assess the non-existent damage, my heart beating a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. The spell was broken. The closeness, the raw vulnerability we had shared in the dark, evaporated under the harsh glare of the overhead lights. We were back to being two men in a room, surrounded by a chasm of things unsaid. We murmured clumsy goodnights and retreated to our separate rooms, but there was no escaping the tension. It followed me, seeping under my bedroom door, wrapping around me in the sheets. I lay awake for hours, my skin still tingling where he had touched me. The next day was a masterclass in avoidance. We moved around the apartment like ghosts, occupying the same space, but never at the same time. If I was in the kitchen, he was in the living room. If he came into the living room, I would suddenly remember an urgent need to be in my bedroom. Our conversations were reduced to monosyllabic grunts and clipped, functional phrases. Coffee's on, thanks, need the bathroom? Go ahead. It was a painstaking choreography of mutual retreat. My mind, however, was anything but quiet. It became a relentless courtroom where I was the prosecutor, the defense, and the terrified defendant. I replayed the moment in the pantry over and over again. The evidence was clear, his thumb on my cheek, the way he'd brought it to his lips. But what did it mean? My inner prosecutor argued it was undeniable proof of interest, a clear signal. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a taste, a question. But then my defense attorney, the cautious, self-protective part of me, would take the stand. It was dark. He was terrified. It was a bizarre, subconscious reaction to stress. A fluke. He was probably mortified by it now, desperate for me to forget it ever happened. He was straight, and this was just a weird, meaningless blip caused by fear and confinement. To hope for more was to set myself up for a devastating fall. Wasn't that the story of my life? This internal debate was exhausting. Every time I saw him, my heart would leap with a wild, irrational hope, only to be immediately crushed by a wave of fear and doubt. I analyzed his every move. Did that glance linger for a fraction of a second too long? Was the way he said good morning different today? Cooler? Warmer? I was losing my mind, dissecting microscopic interactions for clues, for proof of one verdict over the other. The hope was the most painful part. It was a fragile, green shoot pushing its way through the concrete of my carefully managed expectations. It whispered to me that maybe, just maybe, this man who I found so beautiful, so kind, so compelling, might feel something for me, too. It was a terrifying thought, because if that hope was misplaced, the disappointment would be crushing. It was far safer to remain in my fortress, to retreat back into my quiet, ordered world and pretend that nothing had happened in the dark. But I couldn't. He had tasted the salt on my skin, and in doing so, had unlocked a hunger in me I never knew I had. The silence between us was becoming unbearable, a screaming void that demanded to be filled. 2 full days of this suffocating silence passed. 2 days of careful maneuvering and unspoken tension. By the 3rd evening, I felt like I was going to fracture from the pressure. I was sitting on the sofa, trying and failing to read, the words blurring on the page. I had resigned myself to another night of this silent torture when Julian walked into the living room and, instead of retreating, simply stood in the doorway. I could feel his eyes on me, and I kept my own glued to my book, my knuckles white on the cover. The quiet stretched on for a full minute. Finally, he broke it. "Miles," he said, his voice low and steady. "We can't keep doing this." I looked up. He looked exhausted, his face drawn. The easygoing confidence was gone again, but this time, it wasn't replaced by fear. It was replaced by a kind of weary resolve. He walked over and sat down in the armchair opposite the sofa, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He wasn't running away anymore. "I'm sorry," he said, his gaze direct and unflinching, "for how weird I've been. It's not fair to you, especially after you've been so generous, letting me stay here." "It's fine," I mumbled, my default setting for emotional evasion. "No, it's not," he countered gently. "We need to talk about what happened. In the pantry." My heart seized in my chest. This was it. The verdict was about to be read. I braced myself for the gentle letdown, the "I was just freaked out" speech, the apology for giving me the wrong impression. I just nodded, unable to form words. He took a deep breath. "I haven't been totally honest with you, Miles." My stomach plummeted. "Here it comes. The storm. I am terrified of them. That part was true. What happened with the tornado when I was a kid, that's real." He paused, searching for the right words. "But being in that pantry, being that close to you, that wasn't just about being scared of the storm. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, his eyes full of a vulnerability that mirrored my own. Here's the thing. I've been interested in you for months. Since the day I moved in. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. I stared at him, sure I had misheard. I'd see you through your window, he continued, a faint, self-deprecating smile on his lips. Reading your books, being so quiet and calm. You're like this peaceful island in the middle of all this noise. And I had no idea how to talk to you. I'm loud, and I'm always covered in dirt. And he gestured vaguely at me, at my books, at my ordered life. I felt like I'd just scare you off. So I just said hi and hoped one day I'd figure it out. He let out a shaky laugh. And then the tree fell. And suddenly I was living in your house. It felt like some kind of crazy sign. But I was still a coward. Until we were in the dark, and I was losing my mind, and all I could think about was how steady you were. And then, I did that. What I did, it wasn't an accident, Miles. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was just hoping. I don't know what I was hoping. That it meant something to you, too. The fortress, the walls, the careful defenses I had spent years building, they didn't just crumble, they were atomized. All the fear, the anxiety, the overthinking, it all washed away, replaced by a wave of pure, brilliant relief. He felt it too. He had been just as scared, just as uncertain as I was. It did, I finally said, my voice thick with emotion. It meant everything. The relief that flooded his face was a mirror of my own. The tension that had held him so rigidly seemed to melt away. He stood up, crossed the small space between us in 2 strides, and sat down on the sofa next to me. The careful distance we had maintained for days was gone. Good, he whispered. That's good. He reached out, not with the frantic energy of the other night, but with a slow, deliberate tenderness, and cupped my cheek. His thumb traced the same path it had in the dark. This time, I could see the question in his eyes, the hope. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes, and gave him my answer. When he kissed me, it wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a kiss of profound relief, of shared confession. It was confident and sure, the way I had always imagined Julian would be, but it was also gentle and deeply tender. It tasted of coffee and honesty and the end of a long, lonely silence. It was the closing of one chapter of my life, and the explosive, beautiful, long-awaited beginning of a new one. In the weeks and months that followed, life settled into a new kind of ordinary. Julian's apartment was eventually repaired, a slow process of new drywall, fresh paint, and the scent of sawdust. But even after his place was declared livable again, he rarely slept there. My little duplex, my former fortress of solitude, had become our shared home. His loud rock music now mixed with my quiet classical playlists. His muddy work boots had a permanent spot by the door, right next to my sensible loafers. My world was no longer hushed. It was filled with the sound of his laughter, and I found I wouldn't have it any other way. We learned the rhythms of each other's lives. I learned that his professional confidence hid a deep-seated desire for domestic order. He was neater than I was in many ways, finding a zen-like calm in organizing a spice rack or perfectly folding laundry. He learned that my quiet nature wasn't a sign of fragility, but of a deep inner world that he loved to explore. He'd ask me about the books I was reading, listening with genuine curiosity as I explained the intricacies of medieval poetry or narrative theory. Our relationship was built in those small moments. It was him bringing me a coffee at my desk at the library, smiling at my blushing coworkers. It was me leaving a thermos of hot soup on his doorstep on a cold day when he was working outside. It was falling asleep on the sofa together, my head on his chest, his steady heartbeat a comforting drum against my ear. The awkwardness that had once defined us was replaced by an intimacy so comfortable it felt like we'd known each other for a lifetime. One evening, a few months after what we had started calling the Great Pantry Incident, we were cooking dinner together in my kitchen. The window was whole, the ceiling was patched, and the only storm was the one we were creating with flying flour and clanging pans. Julian was trying to teach me how to make fresh pasta, and I was failing spectacularly. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder to guide my hands. "You're thinking about it too much," he murmured into my ear, his voice warm. "It's just dough? You have to feel it." I leaned back against his solid frame, my flour-dusted hands stilling under his. The scent of him, clean and earthy, filled my senses. I was never very good at feeling things, I confess quietly. I was always better at organizing them. He turned me around in his arms, his expression soft. "Well," he said, smiling, "I'm glad a little chaos blew into your life." He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, lingering kiss that tasted of flower and home. Looking back, I see that I had mistaken silence for peace and order for happiness. My life wasn't a library to be kept pristine. It was a story waiting to be written. Julian didn't just break through my walls. He showed me that the safest place to be isn't a fortress at all. It's a space you build with someone else, a shelter made of trust and vulnerability. The chaos of the storm didn't destroy my world. It just cleared away the unnecessary parts, leaving behind what truly mattered. It left me with him, and that has made all the difference.